panel. My name is Sean Ryan, and before beginning I'd just like to acknowledge the Larrakia people on whose land we are now living. And the point of my debate this afternoon, or my opposition to unconventional shale gas mining, will be around the social impacts as being felt by communities in the Beetaloo sub-basin region. Now, I'll just begin by stating my experience in the Northern Territory. I came up here in '83 to be a teacher from Sydney. I grew up in Sydney in a strong Roman Catholic family. Ordinary child, went to school and absorbed the values of Australia, in which we all share. Now, when I came to the Territory, I did my studies for a year, built on studies that I'd previously done in New South Wales and Sydney. I might add, in a religious order, but that's neither here nor there now, such a long time ago. But I opted, on graduating with a diploma, opted to go rural teaching, and I went to a place called Killarney Station, which is outside, 3 hours outside the western side of Katherine. Now, it's a normal white cattle station. There's hundreds in the Territory, hundreds in North Queensland and the Kimberley. Very similar. Black people work there, many white people. They call on some expertise, such as bore mechanics and accountants and management. It's quite a big process to run a cattle station, because they're become little self-contained industry, and often cut off by weather, rain and long distances and bad roads and whatever. But I did gain some knowledge into that industry. The Indigenous people worked there. They were working for wages at that time. This was 1984. But there was still a kind of a division in the social setup, such as Aboriginal people living in sheds to one side, not sitting with the white Australian workers. Some honoured Aboriginal people did, but mainly they were dislocated Indigenous people from the region of Katherine who'd lost contact with their traditional lands. That more traditional people were sitting or living in sheds across the way, but they were, not mistreated as such. But you wouldn't say it was the equal treatment that our sons and daughters would like to receive, or our own family in those days. And I taught the children, and I'm presuming a bit to speak for Indigenous people here, but I hope you can see this just based on my experience of being around communities and being with Indigenous people as a teacher and educator. I'm not speaking for them as such, I'm speaking from my own experience and from what I've seen. Now, in Australia, at that time, of course, the children were to follow a curriculum, which was the same as Sydney, Melbourne, Darwin. But after a few short weeks, I kind of realised the difficulty as a teacher to meet these expectations of literacy and numeracy particularly. And try as I might, I had to really redesign my curriculum to meet those needs. And without faking a curriculum or my reports, I had to bend the rules of a teacher as far as I could. These children were aged from 5 to 15 in one classroom on the station. They were all Indigenous children except for the daughter of the owners, and I did teach her as best I could in that one small classroom. But the children had no literacy, aged 8, 9, 10, 11 or 12. These Indigenous students from around Top Springs area of the Territory. And I'll be leading to show that this is not uncommon through my experience of further teaching in places. So I had to doctor my my programs and to meet their needs, but I did feel disconsolate knowing that I'd leave that school after 2 short years and really not meet their needs. That was not shameful. You do the best you can in difficult circumstances. I then went to the desert to a bilingual school called Willaura, not far from Yuendamu, the Warlpiri people. It's in that region, central Australia, Tanami Desert, in from Tea Tree, 1.5 hours drive. Again, very isolated, and often this is the way of the Northern Territory, this isolation. But I guess it's not the main problem. The main problem, again, was with literacy and numeracy and the forces of a white government saying that these children, they did have their own language taught there. It was a bilingual school at that stage in 86. But again, the literacy outcomes were poor compared to Melbourne or Sydney or Darwin or other parts, Bendigo, Ballarat, wherever. You could never achieve anything close to those expectations of literacy. And this is still an ongoing problem in the Territory. And virtually we don't know what to do. We keep the schools open, they go on day after day, week after week. There's plenty of programs, plenty of sport, music, but the fundamental thing doesn't happen. I'm telling you, this is from my eyes. I was in that school for 3.5 years in a bilingual school, and the fundamental point of a school is to teach children and progress them from year to year to year to, say, a normal Australian standard of a year 10. We'd expect our children to at least get to year 10. But the percentages coming through to year 10 in the Northern Territory, Indigenous schools, bicultural schools, or just other schools like Tea Tree or any other tree, these schools in the Peterloo sub-region are very, very similar, very poor. And things like metric measurement, you'd think that that's quite easy to teach, such as what is a millimetre, or measure up that door in centimetres, or how far is it from here to Alice Springs. You know, it's not a matter of intelligence, but our understanding of education hasn't reached that level to know how to effectively teach these people of Australia. And it's the same in the Kimberleys, it'll be the same right through wherever you go. People doctor books, there's year 12 students, but it's not the year 12 pass, as good as it is, and teachers do tremendous work. I'm not belittling anyone here. I'm just expressing the difficulties, which will lead on to my argument about any dealings in communities will come back to this issue of education levels and prerequisites to join a debate. If you can't enter, if you don't know how to measure millimetres of balls or any those intricate issues of engineering, where you've got very little chance of participating in the wider debate as an equal Australian. But anyway, these arguments, it's where I am. It's based on, well, at least I lived in Tennant Creek later after Willaura, 3.5 years in bilingual school. I became an adult educator, and this gave me access to another 30, 40 Indigenous communities in the Northern Territory. Teacher training, basic literacy, numeracy work, certificate 1s, 2s and 3 in ESL work. It was very basic, but again, the same issues came up of literacy levels, numeracy levels, mass, measurement, heights, weights, volumes. These things were almost intractable to get across to adult students who all wished to better themselves educationally. It wasn't through sometimes lack of desire, but in the classroom, I don't know if it's a question of time or money or whether just more research needs to be done into the whole process of psychological processes of what's involved in really educating Australians, all Australians, you know. I mean, there has been progress, and bilingual schools do defend their cultures, and you could argue that's a great thing, it builds up, but again, there's very little equal outcomes such as year 10 qualifications and definitely not year 12s. These mining bodies and companies say that they will engage in debate and explanations, but this is where it's going to become almost impossible to really do properly or fairly. There will be land councils involved, and they do great work. They can bring interpreters, yes. Creole's big in that region, around the Katherine region, and actually Creole language is growing bigger and bigger as the years go by, almost equal to English as a common tongue throughout the north of Australia. But the Elliott people, Marlinger people, they will have their Jingaloo languages and Mudbara languages. But even then, it's still a big gap in explaining technical terms, I think. And I'd really exhort companies to be involved in that, but the expertise, I don't know where it's coming from. And if they go ahead with the fracking in the Beetaloo sub-basin, there's going to be a lot of misunderstandings, misinformation, and I don't think, speaking on behalf of the Indigenous people and communities, the 12 or 15 or 20 affected, I don't think it's such a good idea at this time to go ahead with the fracking industry for some of those points, particularly the educational point that I'm trying to raise here and get across to you, to the panel members. But I'm open for any questioning now. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions at all? Oh, yes, Dr. Ritchie.
Yeah, just one, Mr. Ryan. Your basic point is, I take it, is that given all that, both the cultural and the difficulties of translating information into a form that's readily understood, that there'd be real difficulty in getting informed consent to proposals if that was the question being put.
Yes. Well, that's right. And the educational deficiency leads to dysfunctionality. I think every problem stems really from the lack of a good, solid, basic Australian education, such as housing, health, poverty, all those things I think stem from a good education and the dignity to be able to stand up and speak for yourself as a citizen of this country. And without that, you're not competing on an equal footing, and crime rates against property, crime rates against the person in Katherine, I noticed from the reports, from the coffee reports, have gone up in the last few years. Borroloola people are still poor. Basically $460 a week is the median income of Borroloola people. There's been extractive mining in Tennant Creek for 80 years, but I lived in Tennant Creek for 2.5 years, and you just see the dysfunctionality. There is issues around alcohol, but again, I'd say that they stem from this fundamental premise of mine, the lack of education, and Tennant Creek at times is just, well, it's a different town, yeah. I'm sure you've been there or you will be going there and you'll see the difficulties, although you could claim, well, what's mining been doing for the people there in 80 years? Jabiru has some difficulties. The people I see around Jabiru, I taught at Gumbalanya, the mine there, the Rio Tinto mine now, I think. It's the spin-offs don't seem to be so great for the people. The poverty, the dysfunctionality is still there. MacArthur River, there's ongoing issues there with some of the pollution problems, diverting of the MacArthur River itself, which must have been a horrendous thing for some of the traditional owners at the time, for this to happen to their land for the sake of the mine to go ahead for another 10 years. And out at Nhulunbuy Gove, bauxite, they initially didn't want to go ahead with that. They put up the first petition, as you know, the bark petition, back in the 70s, late 60s, the Yunupingu family and all that, but they still went ahead, and you still see public drunkenness and things that you shouldn't see in normal life amongst our Indigenous brothers and sisters, yeah.
Any further questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Ryan, for coming
Thanks
and presenting today.
Yeah.
Thank you.